He arrived on a Tuesday morning unannounced. My husband had told me a week prior that his son would be staying with us for the summer, but I hadn't expected it to be so soon. Or maybe I had. Maybe I'd been counting the days, folding his sheets a little too precisely, checking the spare room window blinds one too many times. I stood by the kitchen sink, pretending to rinse a coffee cup that didn't need rinsing, when I heard the front door click open. His voice, deeper now, called out a casual hello. My husband answered from the garage, cheerful, distracted. I stayed quiet. I turned when I heard footsteps behind me. He was taller than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, with that air of someone who'd been too many places and seen too much for his age. His eyes landed on me, not startled or polite, but observant. They held just a second too long. "You look different," he said. I smiled, polite. "You've grown." He laughed, scratching the back of his neck. "Guess we all have." That evening, the three of us sat on the patio. The grill hissed, the wine flowed freely, and the summer air wrapped around us like a heavy blanket. My husband talked about his latest business trip. I watched the way the firelight danced across his son's face, illuminating the sharp cut of his jaw. The easy way he leaned back, arms loose over the chair, like he belonged in every space he walked into. At one point, he looked at me and said, "This place is beautiful. You made it feel like home." It was a simple compliment, but something in the way he said, "you," deliberate, separated, made my stomach tighten. I looked down at my glass and swirled the wine. Later that night, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair. The silk of my robe clung to my skin in the humid air. I caught my own reflection, then looked away too quickly. It had been so long since someone looked at me like that. Like a woman, not a wife, not a placeholder. In bed, my husband kissed my shoulder before turning to his side. It was affectionate, routine. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after his breathing settled. The next morning, I wore a dress I hadn't worn in years. It was casual enough, but the fabric clung gently to my back. I told myself it was because of the heat. I told myself I wasn't thinking about walking into the kitchen while he was there. I told myself many things. When I passed him in the hallway, his eyes moved across my neckline, then up to my lips. He said nothing. Neither did I. But my pulse answered for me. The morning light fell soft through the kitchen blinds, casting narrow stripes across the tiles. I moved quietly, barefoot, the coolness of the floor grounding me. My robe was loosely tied, silk brushing against my skin like breath. Beneath it, lace, ivory, and delicate, something I hadn't worn in months, or maybe years. I told myself I wore it for comfort, for femininity. But I knew better. The lie was too well rehearsed to be accidental. He was already in the kitchen when I walked in. Shirtless, in sweatpants, leaning over the counter, pouring coffee with one hand, phone in the other. He looked up as I entered, and something shifted in the air between us. Not just awareness, but attention. Quiet, specific attention. The kind that doesn't need to be spoken to be understood. "Didn't mean to wake you," he said, voice low from sleep. "You didn't." I moved past him to the cupboard, reaching for a cup. My shoulder brushed his arm, light as mist, but it was enough to charge the space with heat. He didn't move away. I could feel his body stillness, like the pause between lightning and thunder. He handed me the coffee pot. Our fingers touched. Neither of us flinched. I poured the coffee slowly, carefully, as if I could delay the silence that followed. I sat at the edge of the table, crossing my legs under me, robe parting just slightly above the knee. He leaned against the counter, watching me in that unhurried way that made me feel naked beneath the silk. "You always dress like that in the morning?" he asked, half a smile curling his lip. "Only when it's warm," I said, sipping, "and when I'm feeling lazy." He looked like he wanted to say something more, but didn't. Instead, he walked over and sat across from me. The chair creaked under his weight. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, almost too casually, "You know, You don't seem like someone who's lazy. I raised an eyebrow. And what do I seem like? He held my gaze. Someone who remembers what it feels like to be noticed. The words hit me like a slow wave, not harsh, but deep. I felt my breath catch, then settle lower. We stared at each other, not awkward, not flirtatious, just there. A quiet stillness that wrapped itself around us like a thread slowly pulling tighter. I stood up. Slowly. My cup empty. My skin suddenly too warm. I moved toward the sink, passing him. He didn't look away. I didn't either. I turned to face him, only inches between us now. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space, and somewhere outside a bird chirped, oblivious to what was happening in our kitchen. He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from my collarbone. The backs of his fingers grazed my skin, and I felt something rise in me. Not fear, not guilt. Hunger. I stepped closer. He didn't move. His breath met mine in the narrow space between us. And then, without hesitation, I kissed him. It was quick, restrained, a sharp inhale of something we had both tasted before in silence. His hand barely touched my waist. My fingers caught the fabric of his shirt. Then I pulled away. We didn't speak. I left the room, heartbeat heavy, every nerve wide awake. I didn't feel shame. I didn't feel regret. Just the lingering imprint of his mouth and the terrifying clarity that I would do it again. The afternoon sun pressed against the windows, painting shifting patterns on the hardwood floor as I stepped into the hallway. My pulse hadn't returned to normal since that morning. Every time I closed my eyes, I could feel the echo of his breath on my lips. Not the kiss itself. That had been brief, almost cautious. But the space before it, the unbearable tension of waiting. That was what stayed with me. That was what undid me. My husband called shortly after lunch. He sounded cheerful, distracted as always. "Can you do me a favor?" he asked. "I've ordered that cabinet we were talking about. They can't deliver it, so someone needs to pick it up from the store. Would you mind going?" I hesitated. "I suppose." "Take him with you if he's free. The box is heavy." I said yes before thinking. I didn't even ask if he'd already spoken to his son. I ended the call, and a minute later I found him in the living room, one hand behind his head, the other lazily scrolling through his phone. "Do you want to drive into town with me?" I asked, tone neutral. "Your father needs us to pick up something." He looked up slowly, his expression unreadable. "Sure." We didn't talk much on the way there. The silence wasn't strained, just full. We both knew that speaking too much might break whatever fragile thread was holding everything together. The radio played quietly. I watched the road, but I felt his gaze shift to me now and then, as if he were trying to memorize the shape of my profile. At the store, we moved efficiently, barely speaking to the clerk. The box was awkward and large, but manageable. He carried most of the weight without complaint. I noticed the way his shirt clung to his back, slightly damp, revealing the flex of his shoulders. I pretended not to notice. On the way back, we stopped for iced coffee. He offered to drive, and I let him. I was tired of pretending not to be curious about how it would feel to sit beside him while he had control of the wheel. I wanted to watch his hands on the gear shift, the way his forearm tensed as he turned. About halfway home, he pulled over by the side of the road, near a small turnout that overlooked the ocean. The sky was turning the color of rust and honey, and the breeze through the window was warm. "Thought you might want a break," he said, killing the engine. I nodded, grateful, though we both knew rest had nothing to do with it. We got out and stood by the low wooden railing, the sound of the waves below filling the silence between us. I didn't look at him, not right away. He broke it first. "This doesn't feel real," he said. I glanced at him. "What doesn't?" "This, United States. The way you look at me." I swallowed. "I don't look at you any special way." "You do." There was no accusation in his voice, no demand, just quiet truth. He turned to me then, not reaching out, not asking, just waiting. I realized he always waited, even for the kiss. He never pushed. He let me move first. If I asked you to forget it ever happened, I said, could you? He shook his head, slow, honest. Could you? I didn't answer, because I couldn't. The image of him leaning across the table that morning, the feel of his fingers near my skin, the way silence seemed to bend around us, none of it could be erased. We stood there until the sky dimmed. Then we got back into the car, the quiet between us heavier than before, but no less magnetic. At home, my husband met us in the driveway with flowers in his hand. Wild ones, wrapped in brown paper. I thought you deserved something pretty, he said, kissing my cheek. I thanked him softly, holding the bouquet like something breakable. And as I stepped inside, petals brushing my wrist, I caught his son's eyes over my husband's shoulder. Just for a moment. Just long enough to know that neither of us had put anything behind us. We were only just beginning. Saturday arrived with a heaviness I couldn't explain. The air was thick, motionless, like the stillness before a storm. Not outside, but inside me. I lay in bed longer than usual, listening to the dull hum of the ceiling fan and the soft rustle of my husband dressing in the adjoining room. He moved quietly, methodically, in the way people do when they've followed the same routine for years without ever stopping to question it. I'll be at the office until the afternoon, he said, stepping into the doorway, adjusting his watch. There's leftover pasta in the fridge if you don't feel like cooking. I nodded, offering a faint smile. Thanks. He kissed the top of my head, not my lips, and was gone. When I heard the front door close, I lay there a moment longer, unmoving. The sheets smelled faintly of detergent and the aftershave he'd stopped using 6 months ago. I stared at the ceiling, trying to find stillness, but my body buzzed with anticipation I didn't want to name. My chest, my arms, my thighs, all of it felt alive in a way that had nothing to do with love and everything to do with the terrible, magnetic pull of someone else's presence in the house. I got up and walked to the closet. My fingers brushed past the casual t-shirts and practical dresses I usually wore at home, until they stopped on something I hadn't touched in years. A matching set of deep green lingerie, simple but sharp, soft lace with just enough structure to remind me what it meant to feel chosen. I slipped it on, then layered a linen button-down over it, leaving it half open, half honest. I didn't know what I was dressing for, but my body did. I found him in the hallway as I turned the corner. Bare-chested again, hair damp from the shower, towel slung low on his hips. He stopped when he saw me, his hand frozen mid-motion as he wiped the back of his neck. We stood there in silence, just a few feet apart. The house was too quiet. No television, no footsteps, just our breathing and the weight of the air between us. You're not working today? He asked, voice dry. I canceled. Didn't feel like going. Neither did I, he said. A beat passed. You look comfortable. I let that word hang between us like a dare. He took a step forward, and I could see him glance at the open neckline of my shirt, the curve of my collarbone, the skin visible beneath the fabric. His eyes flicked back to mine. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I was just going to the kitchen, I said. He nodded. Me too. We walked side by side, neither of us speaking. I could feel the heat of him next to me, the tension humming just below the surface, like static that refused to discharge. In the kitchen, I leaned against the counter. He opened the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and handed it to me. Our fingers brushed again. It shouldn't have meant anything, but it did. Every contact felt amplified, intimate, as if the skin itself was remembering what the mind tried to forget. I've been thinking about that morning, he said suddenly. In the kitchen. I looked at him, my fingers tightening around the bottle. So have I. He didn't elaborate. He didn't need to. I could feel it in the way his eyes moved down my body and came back up slowly, as if mapping something forbidden. He stepped closer, not enough to touch, but close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from him. My breath caught. A noise broke the moment. The sound of the neighbor's dog barking, sharp and sudden through the window. We both blinked, stepping slightly apart. The spell didn't break. It only shifted. I turned to go, heart racing, but he caught my hand. Just his fingers against my wrist, light as air. I looked at him. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. I didn't know what answer would make it less dangerous, less true. "Because no one sees me like this anymore," I said finally, voice barely above a whisper. "Because I want to be wanted." He let go, not in rejection, but because the moment had already said enough. That night after dinner, I lay in bed beside my husband. He scrolled through emails, half watching a muted news channel. I turned off my lamp and lay on my side, eyes open in the dark, the silk of my underwear cool against my skin, the echo of that hallway, and his gaze, pulsing somewhere deep between my ribs. And I knew. I wasn't going to stop this. Not because I couldn't, but because I didn't want to. By the time the sun began to dip behind the trees that Saturday evening, the house had taken on that slow, golden hush that comes right before dusk. The kind of light that softens edges and makes everything feel suspended in amber. My husband had called around 6 to say he was running late. An impromptu meeting, nothing serious, but enough to shift the balance of the evening. I told him it was fine. My voice sounded natural. Too natural. He asked me if I could have someone help carry up the boxes he'd left in the garage earlier that week. Old files, winter clothes, things we kept but never touched. I agreed, and when I ended the call, I sat with the phone still in my hand for a while, the screen gone dark. I found him in the living room, reading on the couch. His shirt was half-buttoned, his legs stretched out. He looked at ease, like the room belonged to him now, like he'd absorbed something from the space just by being inside it. My husband asked if we could bring those boxes up to the attic, I said, not quite meeting his eyes. He looked up slowly, a small nod. "Sure, whenever you're ready." We didn't speak as we moved the boxes one by one. It wasn't heavy work, just awkward, dusty. The kind that makes you sweat in odd places. The attic was cramped and dim, with a single small window near the ceiling that let in slanted light. The kind of place where air doesn't move. The last box was the largest, and we lifted it together. His hands were close to mine, our arms brushing. When we reached the top of the steps, I lost my footing for just a second. Not enough to fall, but enough to make me reach for something. Someone. He caught me, instinctive, steady. One hand on my waist, the other gripping my elbow. I looked up, and there was no space left between us. His breath touched my cheek. The light behind him turned his features into angles. Sharp jaw, narrowed eyes, the line of his throat moving as he swallowed. Neither of us moved. His hand didn't drop. Mine didn't pull away. I said something. I don't remember what. Some excuse, maybe. A noise. But I didn't mean it. Because my body was already leaning into his, betraying me with every shallow breath. He kissed me. This time it wasn't brief. It wasn't testing. It wasn't a mistake to be swept under the rug. It was slow, deliberate. The kind of kiss that asks a question and answers it all at once. His mouth moved with mine like he already knew the rhythm. His hands were careful, reverent, as if he knew this wasn't just about want. It was about being chosen. Finally. Boldly. When we pulled apart, I could still feel the press of his palms against my back, the echo of him in my lips, my chest, the space between my legs. I looked at him. Really looked. And there was no fear in his face, just certainty, hunger, and something dangerously close to tenderness. We stepped back, almost at the same time, and the air filled with the heavy silence of something that had finally, truly happened. Downstairs, the sound of the garage door opening cut through the quiet like a knife. We froze. Then, without a word, we moved. He lifted the box. I took a smaller one, and we descended the attic stairs with practiced normalcy. The smell of sweat and dust clung to my skin, my shirt clinging to the curve of my spine. I didn't dare touch my mouth. It would only make it worse. My husband walked in with a smile and a bag of groceries. "Thought I'd pick up dessert," he said, holding up the paper bag. "Felt like a treat night." I smiled. I don't know how I managed it. We sat down to eat not long after. He talked about his meeting, something to do with leases or insurance. I nodded, laughed in the right places. Across the table, his son ate quietly, eyes low, one hand curled around his fork like it was holding something fragile. My heart beat against the inside of my ribs like it was trying to climb out. Later, when I lay in bed with my husband's arm draped over my hip, his breath warm against my shoulder, I kept my eyes open, wide open. I didn't move. I didn't sleep. I only thought about the attic, the weight of his hands, the look in his eyes when he let go, like he didn't want to, like he wouldn't next time. And I knew then, with terrifying clarity, that I didn't want him to. The days that followed moved with an uncanny calm, like the sea after a storm. Too quiet, too still, as if something enormous had just passed through but left no visible wreckage. I moved through the house with deliberate ease, folding laundry, watering plants, returning phone calls, preparing meals. Nothing out of place, no step skipped. But every gesture, every chore was overlaid with something else. A flicker of memory, a residual heat under the skin, a pulse that refused to slow down. I started dressing differently, not overtly, not in a way that anyone could name. But the fabrics changed. Softer, thinner. Dresses that brushed against my thighs when I walked. The kind that moved when I did. The lingerie, too. I began wearing it under casual clothes just for myself. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But I felt its presence throughout the day, like a secret threaded through my skin. I wore lipstick on mornings I stayed home. I lingered in front of mirrors longer than necessary, watching how my blouse slipped off one shoulder, how my mouth parted when I exhaled. I looked like someone who had been touched recently, and couldn't forget it. My husband noticed. He didn't say anything directly, but he watched me more closely. His eyes lingered when I walked past. He touched me in passing, a hand on my lower back, a kiss to my temple, as if trying to reestablish something unspoken. We hadn't made love in weeks. That was his rhythm, not mine. And yet now, I sensed he was becoming aware of the distance, like someone suddenly noticing how far out to sea they've drifted. One night, I was folding towels in our bedroom when he came in with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "I thought we could sit on the patio," he said, almost shyly. "It's a nice evening." I hesitated, just for a second, then nodded. We sat under the string lights he'd hung last summer, their faint glow casting a softness over the fading lawn. He poured the wine and we talked about simple things. The garden, his clients, the neighbor's new dog. He laughed at something I said, then looked at me like he was seeing me differently. "You seem more open lately," he said. "Brighter, like something lit up in you again." I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't untrue, just misattributed. Later that night, as we got into bed, he reached for me. His hands were warm, familiar. They moved over my skin with kindness, but not urgency. I closed my eyes and tried to follow his rhythm, to feel what I used to feel. But my body didn't respond. Not in rejection, in absence. It was as if the thread that once connected us had unraveled so slowly, so quietly, that I hadn't noticed it was gone until I reached for it and found nothing. When he kissed me, I kissed him back. When he touched me, I let him. But every sensation passed through me like light through glass, seen but not held. I wasn't with him. Not really. My mind kept drifting, involuntarily, to the attic, to the scent of dust and skin, to hands that gripped not with routine, but with hunger, to a kiss that was too dangerous to last and too real to forget. When it ended, my husband rolled onto his side and whispered, "I've missed you." I whispered, "Me too." But I wasn't sure who I was speaking to. The next morning, I found a note under my pillow. A small folded scrap of paper with no name, no time. Just a single sentence in tight, slanted handwriting. "If we'd met somewhere else, would you still have chosen him?" I stared at it for a long time. My pulse thudded in my throat. I didn't know if it was a question or a challenge, and I didn't know which scared me more. The invitation came on a Thursday evening, slipped into the middle of a mundane dinner conversation as casually as a weather report. My husband, mouth half full of roasted chicken, announced he'd booked a weekend getaway for the three of us. A family retreat, he called it. Just a short drive up the coast. Some fresh air, hiking, a little time off the grid. He looked at me with the pride of someone who thought they'd had a clever idea. "We haven't all been away together in years," he said, refilling my glass. "Figured it's time." I smiled because I had to. I nodded because my throat tightened when I tried to speak. His son sat across from us, silent. He hadn't touched his fork in minutes. When our eyes met, something passed between us. Not panic, not even fear. Something more complex. A kind of quiet surrender. As if we both understood that the trip would mark some irreversible shift, though neither of us knew what form it would take. We left Saturday morning, the car packed with snacks, jackets, hiking boots, and tension so thick it could have cracked the windshield. My husband drove. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the trees blur by. His son sat behind me, knees almost brushing the back of my seat, his presence a silent storm. It rained that night, hard and sudden. We arrived at the motel damp and irritable, laughing through our complaints like actors reading lines. The front desk clerk gave us 2 rooms, one for the 2 men, one for me. My husband joked that it was like a high school field trip. I laughed too loudly. By the time we settled in, the rain had intensified. The hiking trails were closed. The nearby restaurant was full. We ate cold sandwiches in the small common area near the vending machines, surrounded by unfamiliar families and flickering fluorescent lights. Later, when the halls quieted and the world shrank to the echo of dripping gutters, I stepped out of my room to get water. The ice machine hummed. My bare feet patted along the carpet. He was already there. We stopped when we saw each other. No one else was awake. The hallway was dim, washed in yellow light. I held my empty cup. He held nothing. "You couldn't sleep?" he asked, voice low. "Not really." I felt the weight of his eyes slide down my body. The oversized sweater I'd thrown over my nightshirt, the bare legs, the flush creeping up my neck. I saw the way his hands curled slightly, fists without force. "I don't think I can keep doing this," he said. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. I stepped closer, not touching, just closing the gap between us. The silence became unbearable. I could hear the soft rasp of our breathing. "I've never wanted someone I couldn't have," he said. "Not like this." I opened my mouth, but no words came. I felt the ache in my chest, deep and expanding, like grief, like hunger. "I think about you all the time," he whispered. "Not just your body. The way you laugh when something's really funny. The way you say goodnight when no one's listening. The way you look at him, even now, like you're trying to convince yourself he's enough." My eyes burned. I blinked quickly, then turned, stepping away, but he reached out and caught my wrist. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," he said. I don't know how to stop feeling this." We stood there motionless, his fingers around my wrist, heartbeat against heartbeat. It wasn't sexual. It was something deeper, far more dangerous. It was the admission of a truth we had no place for in our lives. I pulled my hand free, gently, and walked back toward my room without looking back. My knees barely held. My skin buzzed where he'd touched me. Back inside, I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time. The silence of the room pressed in. Rain hit the window in soft, uneven rhythms. I thought about what he'd said. Not the part about wanting me. The part about how I looked at my husband. Like I was trying to convince myself. Because he was right. And that terrified me more than anything else. Returning home after the trip felt like stepping back onto a stage, the curtains drawn, the audience watching, but none of the actors remembering their lines. The house greeted us with its usual quiet, a familiar scent, the comfort of known spaces. Yet something had shifted. As if the walls themselves were listening now. We unpacked in silence. My husband busied himself with the laundry, offering updates about a leaky pipe in the guest bathroom and a delayed invoice from work. I nodded, responding in small, practiced phrases. His son disappeared into his room. The door closed with a softness that felt louder than it should have. Over the following days, we settled back into rhythm. On the surface, nothing was out of place. But beneath that surface, everything had become more brittle. I found myself avoiding mirrors. Not because I couldn't face what I saw, but because I didn't know which reflection would stare back. The wife, the woman, or the other. The tension between us, me and him, didn't explode. It simply thickened. Small things grew weighted. His footsteps in the hallway. The way he lingered when handing me a dish. The brush of his hand when reaching across the table. They weren't accidents anymore. They were choices. Quiet, deliberate choices. Each one a whisper against my skin. One afternoon, while my husband was out on errands, I was in the laundry room folding towels. The door creaked open behind me, and I didn't have to turn to know it was him. I could feel it. The way the air changed, charged, heavier. "You left this downstairs," he said. I turned. He held out one of my sweaters. Nothing special, but the way his fingers held the fabric felt intimate, almost reverent. I took it from him, our hands brushing. His fingers didn't move away immediately. "You've been avoiding me," he said. "I've been careful." "Same thing." I folded the sweater slowly, trying to control my breath. "What do you want from me?" "I don't know," he said. "Maybe just for you to stop pretending this is only happening to me." I looked at him then. Really looked. His face wasn't hard. It was tired, and vulnerable in a way that made something inside me crack. Because it wasn't about desire anymore. It hadn't been for a while. It was about recognition. About seeing someone and being seen in return. "I'm not pretending," I said quietly. "I feel it too. All the time." We stood there in silence, and for the first time, the silence didn't hurt. It held us. That night, at dinner, I caught my husband watching us. He didn't say anything, but his eyes lingered too long when we laughed at something trivial. He was watching me, not with suspicion, but with a kind of slow, dawning awareness. Like someone seeing a detail they've overlooked for too long. Later, as we lay in bed, he reached out, resting his hand on my hip. It was a simple gesture, one he'd done 1,000 times, but now it felt like a question. "You've been quiet lately," he said. "I'm tired." "Tired of what?" I didn't answer, because the truth would hurt him in ways I wasn't ready to confront. In the morning, I found another note, tucked into the drawer beside my bed. Folded small. No flourish, no signature. "Come with me. Just for a day. No talking. No explaining. Just you and me." I held it between my fingers, staring at the handwriting I already knew by heart. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding the weight of everything I'd broken and everything I hadn't yet dared to touch. And for the first time, I asked myself not if I would go, but what would happen if I didn't. The morning passed slowly, as if the hours themselves were reluctant to move forward. I sat by the window with a cup of tea long gone cold, watching the garden that had become more his than mine. My husband loved order. Symmetrical hedges, freshly trimmed borders, stones arranged by size and shade. He once said he found peace in predictability, in knowing where everything belonged. I used to envy that in him. Now I couldn't decide if it was a gift or a cage. The note was still in my pocket, its folds softened from being opened and closed too many times. I had read it in silence the night before, after he'd gone to sleep. I'd held it under the lamp, letting the words soak into me. No talking, no explaining. Just you and me. I hadn't answered. I hadn't needed to. The silence between us had been louder than any yes I could give. By the time my husband suggested we take a walk, just the two of us, he said, the sun was already high. I agreed. I didn't know why. Maybe because I owed him that much. Maybe because a part of me still wanted to be the woman he thought I was. We walked down to the shoreline. The air was cool for midsummer, the kind that brushes against your skin like memory. He spoke about his father's old house, a property tax issue at work, the neighbor's new solar panels. I answered in nods and quiet phrases. Every word felt like a stone in my mouth. Finally, after a long stretch of silence, he stopped walking and turned to face me. I know, he said. I looked at him, startled. He wasn't angry, not bitter, just worn. I've known for a while, he continued. Maybe not all of it, but enough. The sea behind him moved in slow, indifferent waves. I wanted to speak, to explain. But what could I say? That it hadn't started with lust? That it had begun in silence, in glances, in longings I didn't know how to bury anymore? I kept telling myself it was a phase, he said. That maybe I'd been distant, distracted. That you'd come back to me once things settled. I lowered my eyes. You've never lost me. You're not here, he said simply. Not really. I felt my throat tighten, my hands tremble slightly at my sides. But he didn't step closer. He didn't accuse. He just stood there, offering something I hadn't expected. There's still time, he said. If you want it. If there's anything left. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know which part of me he was asking for. When we returned home, the house felt different. Not emptier, quieter, but heavier. Like it too had been holding its breath. I walked upstairs alone, my feet slow on the steps, heart louder with every movement. His room, the son's, was open. The bed was made, the closet emptied. He had left. No note, no message, just absence. I stood there for a long time, staring at the neat folds of the blanket, the vacant air. I felt something bloom in my chest. Grief, maybe, or clarity, or both. It wasn't just that he was gone. It was that he had waited for me to choose. And I hadn't. In the evening, I walked back to the garden. The hedges were still sharp, the stones still perfect. My husband was inside, watching the news. I could hear the faint sound of voices through the open window. I sat on the edge of the flower bed, fingertips trailing through the soil. For once, I didn't feel the need to move, or speak, or fix anything. I didn't cry. I just stayed there, surrounded by the ordinary, by the things that had not changed and the things that never would. And somewhere in the silence, I let go of the question I had been carrying for weeks. Not whether I had chosen wrong, but whether choosing had ever really been an option.